Okay, so now that we have everything cut out for view A, I have my back and then my front pouches right here. And I have two pairs of the front pouches because I'm lining them like I do a lot on my other pouches. If you chose not to line it, then you'll just have one pair and where you're going to sew along the outside edge of that pouch. But because I'm lining mine, I'm actually going to take my front pouches and stack them right on top of each other and make sure that your two pouches are face sides together. So the two pouches, you will see the wrong side of your pouches on both sides. So I have everything lined up here. Let's see if I can get this a little bit better down here. And all your edges are matching, and I've got a matching notch up here. Okay, then I'm going to bring my pins in here, which I forgot to bring to the table with me, and I'm just going to pin these together. Now, if you have stable fabric, you may not need to pin. I'm just going ahead and pinning so you can see what I'm going to do. And I'm going to sew along the outer seam here with my overlock all the way around the outer edge here. Okay, so now that the front pouch is sewn together, I'm just going to remove these pins. And we just need to turn it face side out. And remember, if you have a lining like I do, you're going to want to make sure that when you turn this face side out that you have both of those face sides. Now, if you're using a different fabric for your lining fabric, you will automatically know. If you are using the same fabric as your lining, you'll just need to decide which side you prefer on the outside of the garment. And of course, if you're not lining it, then you'll just have a seam there in the inside. So now that that's been turned face side out, I'm going to open up my back piece. And this is my face side. So I'm going to match face sides to face sides, the front pouch to the back at the crotch seam here. Let me move this over here. And I will match these seams up so that everything lines up nicely. Edge to edge, and I'm just going to go ahead and put a pin there. And I'm going to stitch right across that crotch line, overlock straight across here. Okay, so I've got the front and back sewn together at the crotch, and what I need to do is I need to turn this so I can see the inside. So I want to see the wrong side. This is the wrong side of the back, and this is the wrong side of the front, and it's a pouch, so that's why it looks kind of wrinkly. And I'm just going to pin the tops up here together just to keep everything together so that they don't move around when I'm working with it. You could also baste these together up here, but that's not necessary because that's where we're going to put the waistband. Okay, so we need to talk about this leg opening elastic. I pinned them together so I wouldn't lose them. Okay, so we need to actually overlock these to the wrong side of the garment, which is the wrong side of the back and the wrong side of the front. And one of the elastics goes on either of the leg openings, and this along here is actually the leg opening. So now, the amounts that I gave you were pretty close. They're probably 1 inch to 2 inches shorter than the actual length of this, and that's because we need to stretch the elastic on here, even in places that don't really need to seem like they need to be elasticized. So when your machine sews the elastic on, it stretches the fabric and it stretches the elastic. So we need to stretch the elastic a little bit as we sew around to bring that back to the original size and to give it a little bit of help by holding on to your body. So that's what we'll do around the front, where there's really no extra stretch that is needed. until we get to the back where I have two notches. I have a notch here toward the crotch, and I have a notch here up at the waistband where the waistband will hit. Between these two notches, we actually need to stretch the elastic about twice as much as what we were stretching it before up here in the front. So imagine if I'm stretching this elastic just a little bit, maybe I'm making it 1/8 of an inch longer than it normally is, then between these notches, I'm going to stretch it 1/4 inch longer. And as you get more practice with this, you'll understand the stretch qualities a little bit more and how much you need to stretch for your own body or making for other people. So I'm going to stretch this more between these notches. And the reason I'm doing that is because this curved area here is where your rear end is, your buttocks. And so we want it to actually grip onto your buttocks to hold it in place. So that's why we elasticize or stretch it a little bit more right here. So I'm not a big believer in notch here, notch there, unless we're actually doing waistbands. So the way I like to do it is just kind of stretch it as I go, and the amounts that I gave you will definitely fit onto this piece. You may have a little extra up here to cut off, and that's fine. So we're going to stretch as we go. So I'm going to do this first side starting on the front, and then the second side I'll start at the back. And the first go around I'm not going to speed it up, but the second leg opening I will speed up. Okay, so our elastics are on, and let's just have a look at these really quick. Now what we really are looking for is how even the gathering actually looks on either side. So it looks like I didn't get enough here and I got too much here. This one looks fairly even all the way around. And then on the front, it looks fairly even as well, although I still have some extra up here and not very much extra here. This is where I started on this side, and this is where I ended. So I started here and here. So the extras don't really match. That's probably not a really big deal until we find out once we wear it. So now in the industry, they have a machine that puts all this on, and it does the same amount of pull at the same time. So that's why in the manufacturers they have a machine with a special foot that actually elasticizes everything, and they just put it on really quickly. But at home we kind of have to do it manually. So you'll just have to practice and get used to how much and where you need to actually pull the elastic as it's going through. So now the next step is actually, turn this over to the inside. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to turn the elastic over and stitch it down with the zigzag machine. Now if you have a cover stitch, you can use a cover stitch on this one side. I'm just going to use a zigzag. I'm also going to be using black thread. Of course, you want to use a matching thread color unless that's your kind of style or design style that you want a contrasting thread color for the outside, but I'm using black so you can actually see the stitches that I'm using. And I think I'm going to use a 4mm length by 4mm wide. So now, as in all of the other elastics, when you fold it over, you want to match the edge of the elastic you're folding it over, and you don't want to have it way over here with a lot of extra flimsy fabric. So I usually stretch the elastic and fold it over and make sure it's flush here with that edge of the elastic. Now I don't pin all the way down, I fold as I go, but you're going to need to stretch the elastic back to that original shape and original size of that fabric as you go. So again, you'll be stretching it again as you run it through your machine. So I'm going to do that right now on both sides. Okay, so now we need to prepare our elastic waistband. And again, I'm using the sport elastic that I like. And this particular elastic has some ribs here on the elastic. And the face side of it is the side where you can feel the ribs, and the wrong side is the more flatter side. So what I'm going to do, I've cut my elastic the length that I needed, and I'm going to match the two cut ends to face side, that ribbed side that I was talking about, together at the cut ends, and I'm going to stitch them together using a straight stitch, using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to put a pin here for that so I can mimic that, because I'm going to do another step. Once I've got that seam sewn, I'm going to fold the seam of the elastic back, and then I'm going to stitch down these edges, the cut edges, to the elastic using a short and narrow zigzag stitch. So you'll see me do that in the machine. Okay, so I'm going to take this over to the machine and prepare the elastic. Okay, so now that we have the waistband ring all sewn together, all we need to do now is find the center front. We're going to use this seam as the center back. So I'm just going to fold it on that seam and then fold it in half, and the opposite end will be our center front. So I'm just going to put a pin there. And now we're ready to match it to the garment. Okay, so here's the garment that we're going to be putting the elastic waistband on, and I've got the elastic all prepared and ready. Now on this particular view that I have the center front seam, because this is the pouch, I have a center front seam here, so I know where that is, but I don't have a marking at the waist, and I chose not to put a notch there just because it's going to be cut away, and it's very simple to find the center of the back. So I'm just going to match up, fold it in half, edge to edge, and just carefully fold the fabric in half, and I'm going to put a pin here, and that will be our center back. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean up these extra. If you have extra elastic, I'm going to go and clip that, trim it up just to clean it up. I mean, you can cut this. This will be cut off after I attach the elastic anyway, but it just makes it a little bit easier to sew. So got that taken care of. Okay, I'm going to lay this back out. So this is the back, so I'm going to take my elastic waistband and I'm going to match those raw edges. That will be the inside, so I want this the ribs to be on the outside. So I'm going to match that up here, that seam to that pin. And then I'm matching the edge of the elastic with the edge of the garment. All right, and I'll just put a pin there. I can take out the other pin once I get that in there. So I'll take the center pin out. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pin the fabric to the top of the waistband. That keeps everything nice and flat. Now all I need to do is just kind of match the elastic. You don't need to stretch it. I built a pattern so we don't need to stretch the waistband past the garment. So it's just going to match up exactly with the elastic. And I'm going to put a pin here at the edge. And I'm going to also put a pin up here at the top of the elastic. That just keeps everything together. Now I'm also going to do the opposite side, matching the edge of the garment or the garment fabric to the edge of the elastic, and I'm going to put a pin here and up at the top here. That just keeps everything together. Now you could also put pins here. I think I'm pretty good at the short distance. So now let's have a look at this. We want to make sure that we don't get this waistband twisted. So I have it matched here to the back, and so this is the front and this is the way it would be worn. So I want to fold, this is the wrong side of the back, and I'm going to fold this front up. And now I'm seeing the face side of the front. And I want to match the elastic to the face side of the garment because we want to make sure that this is the way we'll step into the garment. Okay, so just make sure that you have that, otherwise you might get some twisting going on and then you'll have to rip out your sewing. So I'm just matching this pin up to the center front, and I'm just going to use this pin to pin it in place here, and then I'll grab another pin just to pin the top of it like I did the back. And then follow the garment along the elastic, matching the edge of the fabric. And if you didn't see it before, I will just show you on the opposite side. The front pouch area is actually, the waist area is at an angle. You probably couldn't see that on the pattern, but actually it angles up this way, and that's just to give you some shape for your body. So I'm just following that up. Again, the edge of the fabric to the edge of the elastic, and I'm going to pin one more pin here. I guess this is the only time I really like to use a lot of pins, and that's just to keep everything nice and flat and together while we're sewing. Okay, so this is how we would get into the garment, and now all we need to do is stitch across from each edge of the front and then each edge of the back. And I'm going to start with the back. I'm going to use a zigzag stitch, the same length and width I did on this elastic here, so 4mm long by 4mm wide. Again, if you have a cover stitch machine, you can use a cover stitch machine to attach the elastic. I would suggest using 3 needles. That will just secure it a little bit more. So I'm probably going to back stitch with my zigzag right here, and then go across and then back stitch here at the end. So I'll meet you over at the sewing machine. Okay, so our waistband is on our garment, and I'm going to remove these extra pins here. And the last thing we need to do is just to clean up the inside of the waistband. So this next step isn't, you don't have to do it, it isn't necessary. What I'm going to turn the garment inside out, and what I want to do is I actually want to cut off this extra fabric here. Now you could run another row of stitching here to secure it on. You could also run another row of stitching up here at the top. I might trim a little bit of this away, just making sure that you're catching that fabric for a zigzag at the top if you don't want to cut this away. So I'm actually just going to clip this extra away from the back and the front. Try not to get too close to your stitching. You don't want to accidentally clip those stitches. Now, if you have a cover stitch machine, you want to make sure that, again, you don't clip into that, otherwise your stitching will unravel. Now, there is one more thing you could do after you clip this, or even before you clip this. If you feel like the edges of the front or the back are pulling away, and you want to make sure that it really doesn't pull out, and I'm talking about these edges here, you could come back with your straight stitch machine with a straight stitch and just stitch back and forth here, do like a little stitching here just to secure that at the bottom of the elastic a little bit more. That's an option. But with that done, this garment is all complete. Okay, so now for view B, the first thing that we're going to need to do before we add the elastic around the outside is we actually just need to sew these two pieces together at the crotch seam. So I'm going to match face sides together at the crotch seam. And this is so short I didn't bother to bring any pins over. So I'm going to match those up, and then I'm going to overlock these together. And then we will, after that, we will actually put the elastic. Now, before I actually sew this, I chose not to line this front piece. If you choose to line it, you obviously need to cut another piece of the front pattern piece, the same exact piece, and then you're just going to double it and sew the seam together. If you want to enclose the back crotch inside the lining, then actually put face side, your outside, face side to face side of the garment, and then put your lining face side to the wrong side of the back, and you're sandwiching the back in between the front pieces, and then you'll sew, and that will actually encase the back crotch seam. But I chose not to do that. So I just have my front piece and my back piece matched up here at the crotch seam, and I'm going to sew them together here at the crotch seam. Okay, so our crotch seam is sewn together. Let me just fold this out, and I'm seeing the wrong side here. This is the front and this is the back. And now we need to work on our leg opening elastics, and right along here on the edge here is actually that leg opening. And I have my elastics here. I kind of pinned them together to keep them together. So one goes on each side, and notice that I didn't cut my threads off here really short at the crotch seam, and that was because I don't really kind of want this to unravel. So I'm just giving it a little hope there, a little help, that it won't unravel and the seam won't bust open while I'm working with the elastic. So now we've cut the elastics to the desired length, and I'm not a big proponent of putting a bunch of notches, stretch to here and then stretch to here and then stretch to there. So I give you a pretty good amount of elastic so at least you don't run out by putting this all the way around the edge here, and that's basically what we're going to do. But it is a little bit shorter because you will need to stretch as you go. When you sew elastic on, the machine actually stretches both the knit and the elastic. And so what we need to do is we need to stretch the elastic just a little bit as we're sewing around to bring that back to its original shape, but also give it a little elasticization, I don't think that's a word. It needs to elasticize a little bit to hold the garment onto your body. So that's what we're going to do. When we go around from the front all the way to the back until we get to these two notches here that are on the back. Let me see if I can move this so you can see where they are. Okay, there's a notch here, and I have a notch here. Now, the notch here that is up closer to the waistband is about where the bottom of the waistband is going to come. Between these two notches, we want to stretch it a little bit more than we would stretch it around the other areas that don't need a lot of hold. So here, if I'm stretching, say, it's hard to see this on the camera, I know it. If I stretch just a little bit, maybe I'm stretching it 1/8 of an inch longer than it already is, then I'm going to stretch it about 1/4 inch longer than it is to get around between these notches. The reason for that is because this curve actually is actually the curve of your rear end. So what we want this section to actually cup onto your rear end to hold it in place. So that's why we stretch this a little bit more than we normally would just to get around the garment. And again, I'll probably start up here. On one side I'll start here, and then the other side I'll start at the back. But I'm going to start up here, and I'm just going to stretch it as I go, just give it a little light tug. And I'm going to do that all the way around the front. You want to make sure that in the front that you're not overstretching it, because that will actually cut into your body and make it uncomfortable in the front to wear. But in the rear, you want it to actually cup onto you. Okay, so I'm going to actually get this started in the overlock, and I probably will not speed up the first round, but the second round will actually be sped up. Okay, so now that we've got the elastics on, we can actually look on the face side. I'm looking on the face side. This is the front and this is the back. And what I'm looking for is how even my stretching was. Looks like I got a little extra stretch here, but this side looks fairly even. Here on the back side, it looks like I had stretches even going from the bottom up, but then most of my stretches here on the other side came here in the middle. Now, when you're wearing it, it's not going to be a big deal. No one's going to know that. In the industry, they have a machine with an attachment and they put the elastic on with all the same amount of stretch. But when we're working at home, we have to kind of take these extra couple steps just to make sure that everything is fitting right. So the next step is to actually fold the elastic over to the inside. Now we're looking at the wrong side. And we're going to need to fold it over here to the inside and then zigzag it down. Now if you have a cover stitch machine, you can use the cover stitch machine to actually hold that down as well. So the way you want to fold this over here is you want to match the edge of the elastic when you're folding it. You don't want to fold it over an excess with having flimsy fabric, okay? So you want to make sure that you're folding it over at the very edge of that elastic to the inside so it's nice and flush right here. And you're going to need to actually stretch the elastic and the fabric to fit it back into where it would naturally, the natural size of the fabric. So once I've got that done, I'm going to just pin one in place. Now, I don't like to pin all the way around. Pins take a lot of time. So I'm going to actually stretch this and fold this as I go in the machine. And I'm going to be using a zigzag stitch. And the size is going to be 4mm long by 4mm wide. And I'm going to be using black thread. And the reason I'm using black thread, I know it's hard to see on the blue, but I'm using black thread so you can see what my stitches are. So you want to be using matching thread color or maybe a contrasting thread color if that's your design style. So just be aware that I'm using the black thread so you can see all of my stitches. So now I'm going to go to my sewing machine, set it up for a zigzag stitch, and get these turned all to the inside. Okay, so now we need to prepare our elastic waistband. And again, I'm using the sport elastic that I like. And this particular elastic has some ribs here on the elastic. And the face side of it is the side where you can feel the ribs, and the wrong side is the more flatter side. So what I'm going to do, I've cut my elastic the length that I needed, and I'm going to match the two cut ends to face side, that ribbed side that I was talking about, together at the cut ends, and I'm going to stitch them together using a straight stitch, using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to put a pin here for that so I can mimic that, because I'm going to do another step. Once I've got that seam sewn, I'm going to fold the seam of the elastic back, and then I'm going to stitch down these edges, the cut edges, to the elastic using a short and narrow zigzag stitch. So you'll see me do that in the machine. Okay, so I'm going to take this over to the machine and prepare the elastic. Okay, so now we have the waistband ring all ready. We just actually, for what we need to do is we just need to start over. Okay, so now that we've got the elastic waistband ring done together. Okay, so now that we have the waistband ring all sewn together, all we need to do now is find the center front. We're going to use this seam as the center back, so I'm just going to fold it on that seam and then fold it in half, and the opposite end will be our center front. So I'm just going to put a pin there. And now we're ready to match it to the garment. Okay, so we are ready to attach the elastic waistband to the garment, and I'm just going to clean up some things on the garment real quick. I'm going to clip off these extra lengths of elastic and the seams and the overlocking, just so it's a little bit cleaner. Now I don't have notches up here that tell you where the center of the front or the center of the back is, and that's just because it's really easy to do that. I'm going to fold each of them in half, matching their edges, and then I'll just put a pin here. I'll pin mark the center front. This is the front. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the back, fold it in half, and of course I'm folding it face side, but of course you could do it wrong side, as long as you're just finding the center of each of the pieces. Okay, so I'm going to take my waistband, and just a little aside, this is not the sport elastic, just in case you're looking in the video and it doesn't look the same. It doesn't really have the ribs. I ran out of the sport elastic, so I had to revert back to my regular elastic. This is what I would normally use for wovens, like maybe if you're making a pajama pant with elastic band, this is what I would use, and it's just a basic knitted elastic. It doesn't have as much body, it's a little bit stiffer, so that's why I don't usually use this for underwear. But I needed to get this video out for you, so that's what I'm using for the rest of this tutorial. So I'm going to take the wrong side. There was the raw edges that we cleaned up. The wrong side to the face side of the back. I like to pin the back first. So match the edge of the elastic up to the edge of the garment. And right there on the center back at that seam, I'm going to take out the pin, and I'm going to pin down here at the bottom. And then I'm going to grab another pin. I'm going to pin also at the top. So I'm pinning at the bottom of the elastic and the top of the elastic where the fabric is, and that helps me keep everything together while I'm sewing. I'm going to have to remove these bottom pins. Now I'm just going to easily and carefully walk the fabric to the elastic, keeping those the cut edge of the fabric to the edge of the elastic all the way to the edge of the back piece. And I'm going to do that on either side of the center back. All right. A couple more pins here. Now, of course, you could do the front, doesn't matter. I just started with the back just because it's a larger piece, so you can see what I'm doing next. All right, so I have the back. Now you could also put a pin here in the middle. That would be fine. I don't have enough pins with me at this time, so I'm just going to leave it like that for right now. So now what we need to make sure is we need to make sure that when we match the front that we don't get the elastic tangled up. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the whole garment and pull it through the elastic so everything is flat like this, right? So I see the face side of the garment and the face side of the elastic. And then I'm just going to hold it with the waistband. I'm going to flip it all over this way, right? So this is the front now. And I'm going to fold up the front onto the back. So this is the wrong side of the back and this is the wrong side of the front. I'll lift up that waistband and then I'll place the waistband at the center front, matching those two pins, and I can just use one of those pins to pin the elastic in place, and I'll use the other one to put the top pin on. Okay, now if you can see, that's the way you would get into the garment. So I'm going to actually walk the fabric along that edge of the elastic the same way I did the back, and I'm going to put a couple pins here. And then I'll walk the other side. Okay, and just to double check yourself, check that you don't have twists in the elastic. And of course, this is the way you would climb into the garment. So that's the way we're going to sew it. I'm going to start with the back. I'm going to zigzag. 4 millimeter long and 4 millimeter wide is the width of the same zigzag width that I use for the elastic around the leg opening. So I'm going to backstitch here at the beginning, go all the way across and backstitch. I'm not really going to stretch at all because the garment and the elastic stretch together. So I will meet you over at the machine. Okay, so now that the elastic waistband is on, there's really just one more step. I'm going to remove these extra pins. They just helped keep everything together while we were sewing. So I'm going to turn the garment inside out. And this next step is not necessary. You don't have to do it. It's just I like to clean up things on the inside, and this extra fabric here that I use for the seam allowance I like to trim away. If you don't want to trim it away, you could of course do another zigzag stitch right here on top just to keep it held down, or you could run a second layer or a second row of zigzag along the elastic as well and then trim off, and then you would only be trimming off about a ½ inch. But I like to trim off the entire thing. So that's what I'm going to do here. You don't want to clip too close to the zigzag stitch because you don't want to hit those stitches because they would actually come out if you got too close to the stitches. Get this all trimmed. Now, if you want to secure these edges of the elastic a little bit more, you could take your sewing machine, go back to your straight stitch, and you could stitch back and forth, just tacking it here at the bottom of each elastic if you feel like that's not enough hold. But with that done, this garment is complete.